Great, fantastic. So we are back doing our regular cyber weekly review of those various, topics in relation to cybersecurity and GRC. And it's always awesome when we can look into all of these issues as it relates to cybersecurity and GRC. And in particular, we'll be reviewing a document or an article in relation to um, a document that was produced by the SANS Institute. And in particular is the fact that when it comes down to assessing um, cyber risk or cyber risk exposure, this is something that starts with knowing your organization's infrastructure. And this is a conversation that we have been having over the past weeks as we look at the whole idea of managing risk within organizations. So, as we have established in few of the conversations that we have actually looked at risk exposure, starting with knowing your organization's infrastructure, which is the machinery of the business, and in particular, its IT business assets, whatever that is. I mean, that could be your routers, printers, servers, firewalls, whichever the case is, those things that actually had value to the organization in terms as a business in meeting its object, its objectives. And oftentimes we hear the um the phrase you cannot protect what you cannot or what you cannot identify or locate within the organization. And this falls within the IT asset management, component of the organization. But the question is IT asset management enough to aid in minimizing or preventing risk associated with cyber attacks? So the fact that you're able to identify your assets, your business assets, is this enough? Is this sufficient to deal with the various associated cyber attacks within an organization? Looking at this in the context that you can locate or identify all the various assets in the organization. Now, to help us look deeper into this question, then we have, as usual, our expert guest, which is Chris Carter, our cyber risk advisor, among the other many titles. So, Chris, as usual, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Again, it's always a pleasure to be on here discussing issues that are relevant to the cybersecurity industry and making sure that we address topics that are relevant, topics that we can take back as practitioners to either our business, our family, or whatever how we live our lives. So I was saying it's always a great conversation to have and to learn and to grow in an ever dynamic and changing industry. So always happy to be here.
Awesome. All right. So, with that said, in particularly, and I will always place a reference link to the article that we are looking at. One of the things that is noted from the article is the fact that many organizations spend vast amounts of time and money trying to identify, catalog, and track every asset they have exposed to the internet. With the rise of cloud computing and the rapid transformation to work from home, maintaining a perfect inventory of every internet exposed asset has become an impossible challenge. And as a result, organizations are searching for new ways to better manage the risk introduced by these rapid changes. So the question is, where do we turn as an organization, or what can IT departments and the security professionals do to help with this challenge that exists? So, Chris, can you speak about the point that organizations are searching for new ways to better manage the risk introduced by these rapid changes within the environment? And that environments are no longer on premise, but it's now a hybrid situation, working from home on premise.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, you think about, and I've always said, joking with one of my colleagues the other day, I said I want to create like a phrase to like that will capture, right, the dynamic nature of what happened, leading up to COVID, and then COVID accelerated, and after COVID, it came normal, right? And that is, we have people with devices all over the world accessing data anywhere on your network to uh, interact with data, right? Interact with an application to either process, store, or transmit data. And if you look at that process, a lot of things can go wrong. A lot of things, there are a lot of opportunities for the bad guys to wreak havoc. So I think in many cases, what I'm seeing is organizations, it's a struggle. Organizations are struggling with it. And one of the methodology that I'm very bullish on is having a zero trust architecture, right? Which is, you kind of start from the inside out, right? And I think that they have a methodology where they say, okay, define the protect surface. The attack surface is kind of everything, right? Everything that could introduce potential vulnerability in your systems and your network, right? That's kind of the attack surface. But as a business, first you have to kind of understand what your protect surface is. An example would be you're a car dealer and you're selling cars. So what is your protect surface? You have your inventory system, you have your financial system, you have your HR system. But let's just lock it down and just focus primarily on your inventory system. So you define that as your protect surface. The next thing you're going to have to do, map your transaction flows, right? So who interacts with that system? Why are they interacting with that system? When do they interact with that system? From where are they connecting to that system? And how do they interact with the system? And why, right? So you kind of understand like the what, why, where, when, how of it all. And then you use that as a guiding. And then you start, so now you've done that. Now you're going to have to create what you call like a zero trust, or create an architecture, right? Once you've created the architecture, you say, yep, you have this system, and this system is connecting to, there are these different hops that have to take place. It's a SaaS or whatever it is. There's a process. Now you kind of have the architecture. The next thing you will have to do is you're going to have to say, okay, how do I uh, how do I control this, right? In the sense, what policies, right? This is where GRC comes in. What policies do I have in place to ensure that when the process is working and the controls that I've put around those processes are effective, they're working as designed. And the next thing, you have to continuously monitor and maintain that. And the monitoring and maintaining of that is something that continues to evolve over time, because in many cases organizations, they either acquire, they divest, or they merge, or things are all the or business, there are certain business processes or business opportunities that forces the organization to make a calculated risk decision. So managing your attack surface, as you can tell, it's a very complicated process that it's dynamic, and organizations continue to struggle with it. So that's a mouthful. I'll pause there and see if you have any follow up.
Sure, exactly. So that is exactly one of the recommendations that um, coming out of that SANS research as it relates to the attack surface. So once an organization is able to identify, to locate where all their critical um, assets are in terms of the business that are connected to the network, then having that inventory, great, fantastic. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, all of these devices, applications, whatever they are, they also prevents various ways whereby attackers can actually get into an organization, which of course then becomes poses risk to the organization. So as part of that, as I mentioned before, it goes beyond not asset management, because most time when persons think of asset management, we are looking at the life cycle of your assets in terms of um, onboarding, offboarding, where they are located, I mean, applications, when they need to be, I mean, license renewal, all of these things. So outside of this, as I said before, there needs to be a framework of management, and that is where you have the attack surface management comes into play. So having your inventory, your asset management, then you also want to tie that along with your attack surface management. So this is our inventory. These are the attack points. Then we also have that merger of managing those attack surfaces that are associated with all of these assets that you have connected to the environment. Bearing in mind that these are assets that are contributing to the business, not just rogue devices, right? So that's a very important thing that is being recommended, is being pushed forward. I mean, that is coming out of this article. And it says that attack surface management addresses a number of issues. And based on the research, approximately 95% or 94% of all enterprises use various cloud services. We have connected devices, all of these things, which also increases the various avenues via which an organization can actually experience various attacks or threats as an organization. So for sure, then as a security professional, then you definitely want to know, turn your attention to better managing the various avenues that these attacks can actually expose your organization to various risks that exist. Now, from your experience, what are some other guidelines? Because one of the big questions is, how do we approach, I mean, attack surface management? Is this something that is done manually, or this is something that is preferred to be done on a automatic or basis, or automated basis rather?
Yeah, so I think you know it would, so to answer the question, it could have to be a semi-automatic, right? Semi-automated. You always need human beings because no business is perfect. No business has a cookie cutter model, and therefore there are sometimes exceptions to the process that has to be managed. If that exception can be automated, then yeah, automated. But a lot of times, what I've seen is a business. There's always an asset somewhere that for some reason does not comply. There could be some asset, like a mainframe, right? And it doesn't comply with what you're trying to do. So there's always something that would prevent you from fully automating the process. But, I always go back to, or I always use the frameworks as a crutch, right? There are two frameworks that I particularly like from or a couple of them that we could actually, that are relevant to this conversation. One is the cyber kill chain. That kind of gives you a strategic, right, view of how your adversary would see your environment. And then from a tactical perspective, more of a practitioner's perspective, you would look at the MITRE attack framework. And there are many tools that incorporate the MITRE attack framework, right? Literally, MITRE attack is, it stands for adversarial tactic techniques and common knowledge, right? And that's right. Within that, you have your tactics and you have your techniques, right? And then you go further down, you have the procedures. It tells you exactly where is this an APT1. Here's how you fix it, and this is how you remedy that solution. So, I would definitely say, use a framework, right? If you're at a strategic level, I would say go start with the cyber kill chain, because that gives you a high level view of how an attacker would right, do reconnaissance, right, and from all the way to reconnaissance to you know maintaining their presence in your organization. And then from a practitioner's perspective, the actual hands-on keyboard, you want to look at how the MITRE ATT&CK framework fits into what you're trying to do. So you have the initial access, I think it's execution, um, persistent, privilege escalation, defense evasion, all those things, right? All the way down to command and control. So that those two frameworks, I think, gives you a very good understanding of where to begin. Because as you mentioned before, you talked about the having an asset inventory. Well, that's the very first step, right? Once you've identified all your assets, which I don't think any organization um, that I know of has a full handle on their inventory. However, you have, to a certain degree, you have a good handle, or you may not have a good handle of what your asset inventory looks like. The next step, right, is now you have to start to think, how do I protect that? How do I harden, or how do I reduce my vulnerabilities? Whatever language you want to use to say, I've now identified my attack surface, right? I now have identified my inventory, and attack. Here's how an attacker can infiltrate or exploit a vulnerability. How do I patch those vulnerability, right? And in the event an attacker comes in, okay, how do you protect it? Right? How do you respond to that intrusion, right? And eventually you will have to recover. Otherwise, you're owned, and being owned is not always a good thing for an organization.
Sure. And one of the things that we are trying to bring across in relation to managing or mitigating risk, because I mean, cybersecurity is all about identifying those risks and managing those in terms of putting the necessary controls in place. At the end of the day, whatever we have to do to ensure that we are minimizing the impact of these various threats on an organization. So one of the things is that for many persons, they are saying that why have so many tools? Why have so many resources? Here we are talking about attack surface management, and there are many solutions that for attack surface management rather than a manual process. Knowing that depending on the business asset that you're dealing with, then the attack surface the scope can be very broad, depending on the application, depending on the hardware that you're working with. So we are not saying that having an attack surface management solution will actually eradicate the overall problems that an organization will face. But having this in place will definitely help, as I said before, having the right governance structure that ties all of this with the necessary policies, procedures, and support of management, creating that culture will definitely help to minimize, to a great extent, all the various possibilities of a risk, I mean, affecting the organization. So the question at the end of the day that most persons will ask is, what are some of those key things that we need to look for if we decide to invest in an attack surface management solution that will be able to help us in our overall risk management as it relates to cybersecurity threats to the organization?
So I think the first and foremost, you have to understand the business, understand your business process, knowing what is important to you. So, yes, attack surface management is it's a sexy word. It sounds great. However, each business has bespoke processes, procedures, and people who interact with those processes and procedures. And you, as a decision maker, when going out to acquire an attack surface management tool, that should have prior to doing that, in addition to understanding your business process, your strategy should also be aligned with the business. So you have a strategy, right? And that strategy is based on the business objectives, on protecting the business, critical business assets. And hopefully you have a framework that you're working with. And the other thing is, always have your requirements and your use cases mapped out, because there are a lot of tools out there that claim to solve the problems, world problems. However, if you go shopping without a grocery list, especially when you're hungry, you're going to buy things that you don't necessarily need. So I think, just being clear in terms of what the business processes are, what your use cases are, understanding the objectives, having a framework, and being able to articulate what exactly the problem you are trying to solve, because your attack surface is huge. And in some cases, there are pieces that you want to prioritize over other pieces, right? So, defining those, having those, that kind of checklist ready to go. And their tools, their technologies are out there. There'll always be technology out there to solve your problem, but are you solving the right problem? So I think being able to calculate the problem, dealing with business objectives, framework, and a set of policies, and ways to operate, I think that those are critical first steps.
Sure, very important. That's one of the big issues as it relates to within the environment, in terms of not all tools will be the silver bullets. There is no silver bullet tool to cyber risk. It's, as I said before, you have highlighted those important points, is to take the business objectives in focus. I mean, to see what it is that actually supports the business, rather than having a number of unwanted, shiny tools lying around in the organizations that are not being used. Knowing that one of the things also is the fact that these same tools can also be having use for an attack within organizations that you have actually seen happening from time to time. So the same tools that are designed to protect the organization are the same tools that are actually opening up, holes or surfaces or backdoors into organizations. So it's a very challenging process when you talk about attack surface management. And that is why it cannot be something that is done without proper organization, proper structure, ensuring that you take everything into consideration as it relates to the business as a whole. So it has to be very structured, bearing in mind that your asset inventory can be a very tedious process. Very tedious process based on experience, to know where everything is. And one of the things is that at times you might even use various tools to identify those assets, but depending on the configurations, depending on the network, depending on the protocols that are being run, you might not be able to even locate those assets on the network itself, and you might think that all is well. So attack surface management is an ongoing process. However, it's an initiative that can also be taken to help with minimizing the various risks within the organization in terms of your exposure here to various threats to the organization as a whole. So one of the things is that as it relates to attack surface management is that you carefully evaluate your vendors, compare solutions to ensure that you're actually making the right decisions in terms of if you are using more of your assets are aligned within the cloud, then you ensure that you have the right tool that is able to carry the necessary assessments within the cloud versus on-premise or within an hybrid configuration sort of a situation, right? And bearing in mind that when you talk about attack surface management applications, this is something that has to be configured, it has to be trained. You have various maybe alerts having to deal with. So this is something that requires proper research, ensuring that you have the necessary support team in place, persons that have the requisite skills to tune these applications so that they actually perform the way they ought to perform in terms of being able to identify, detect, alert, not false positives, but actually give you the correct feedback that is required from these various, applications. So the one of the other questions as it relates to your attack surface management is the fact that where does it all stop? At what point do we? There are so many frameworks, persons are confused. They are saying there are frameworks, there are solutions, there are cybersecurity professionals. What can we actually do to deal with all this fatigue as cybersecurity professionals dealing with these various risks that are associated with organizations?
You know, and then we only have a minute left, but yeah, and again, it comes down to not going shopping without a grocery list, knowing, because there are thousands of vendors with point solutions to your bespoke problem. But again, you have to be able to identify and clearly articulate the problem you're trying to solve. If you cannot do that, I would not recommend any point solutions, because a tool is just a tool. But if you have a process and a framework, and there are many types of framework, you have your typical compliance framework, you have your maturity framework, you have your risk framework, you have all types of framework, and they all make sense. But it's, again, they only make sense if you know where you're going, right? What kind of car are you going to drive? Are you going to use Google or Bing to find your solution? They're all out there. They're tools. But if you know exactly that I would like to go to the grocery store to buy egg, milks, and water, it doesn't matter how you get there. You know what you're trying to do. But if I want to do attack surface management, okay, that's a very bland statement. So I think having your use cases, knowing what your requirements are, understanding what the business objectives are, and what risks you're trying to reduce to an acceptable level, I think that's a great place to start. And there's a plethora of ways uh, in which you can do that. But starting from the beginning is very important.
Sure, and that's a great note for us to end on. So, guys, bear in mind that cybersecurity is not something that you can find in one solution. There's no silver bullets, but it's a combination of elements working together to achieve a common good, and that is to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data within an IT environment. If it's the OT, then it's the reverse. So, guys, stay tuned for our weekly cyber GRC and cybersecurity article reviews. So until then, so Chris, bye.
Cheers, everyone. Have a great week. See you next week.